Good afternoon. I guess it's evening, huh? Good evening, everybody. Well, hey, it's Super Bowl Sunday, and we got another good one for you here. We got Sam Schermer here from Avid Angler, and Sam is somebody who I've run into at the shop a couple times, and it's been funny because the times I've ran into him was during COVID, and I could never see his face. So the other day, I actually got to see a face and a name and voice for the first time. So Sam, welcome, man. I appreciate it.
Of course, Paul. Thanks for having me, man.
Mm-hmm.
Cool to
Yeah,
be.
you're welcome. So did you see the Super Bowl at all today or no?
I didn't. I actually didn't watch it. I was busy doing some other stuff, tying some flies for some upcoming trips, and kind of doing my own thing. But yeah, I heard it was a good one.
Yeah, I had some people over that we were kind of watching it, and I was kind of like, oh, okay, cool. Who's playing? The green
Yeah,
and red team? All right, let's go.
I was kind of in the same boat with you this time around. Absolutely.
Yeah, I had no idea who was in it until like a couple days ago. I'm not a football guy. My wife,
Right.
yeah. You got a couple trips you said coming up. Where are you going?
I'm heading down. I'm gonna look for some fish on the Cowlitz coming up. I think next week, and then after that, hoping to make another trip out, possibly to the Soul Duck out there. I don't know. I know that's coming down to a close, so we'll see if I can kind of squeak in there.
Yeah, I've been hearing rumors that the Skagit today, what's today? Sunday the 12th. I've heard that they're gonna extend that to I think it was March, but again, nothing has gotten passed down officially from Fish and Wildlife. So, like other people were saying, it's just all he said, she said until it's actually official from there. But that'll be nice if that gets extended from there.
Absolutely. No, there were some good fish in there before the closure. The last couple of weeks have been fishing really good. So, fingers crossed we get a season, but I wouldn't hold my breath on it. Absolutely.
Yeah, right. Well,
I
when did
lost.
you get into fly fishing?
My uncle, back when I guess I was 6, was at a family party, and my uncle was a fisherman, tied his own flies, lived out in kind of the Forks general area. And he kind of pulled me aside one time, and I was kind of causing a ruckus, kind of doing what a 6-year-old would do. Pulled me aside and said, "Come on, let's go tie a fly." And that's, kind of what did it. I didn't end up fishing until I was about 7.5, almost 8. So I tied flies for a little bit before I fished, but got into it at a really young age, and it really stuck. Neither parent fished, with me growing up, but they were more than willing to kind of facilitate it and get me out places, and kind of figure out kind of carpools and stuff with friends to get out and fish. So, they were a big part in it. But, growing up, Trout Unlimited was a big thing too. I was actually a board member down with the Bellevue Issaquah chapter.
Oh, wow.
For a couple of years, did that. But no, it's just always been kind of something in the back of my brain that I've enjoyed doing, and it's a good way to get outside and kind of relieve some stress and decompress from everyday life, I guess. So
Yeah, Scott and I were just talking about that a while back ago from the Confluence Fly Shop about how like being out in the outdoors is such like a stress reliever, and it just totally, I mean, for me, I've said this hundreds of times, but it totally is the one thing where I can just totally forget about everything that's going on in life, and you get lost in what it is you're doing, and it's not until you get off the water, a handful of hours later, and you're like, oh yeah, I was stressing about this, and I was stressing in this and that. And I think it's so many aspects that go into, swinging flies on a spay. I mean, you got to sit there and think about, your casting, your timing, your tempo, as you're beginning. But once you get dialed into it, then you're kind of, it's all dialed in, and it just becomes second nature. But you're always doing something. You're floating down the river, or you're, one step, two step, three step, cadence of whatever you're doing. There's always something going on. So yeah, talk to me kind of about like your just, your mindset when you're out in the outdoors. Like, what does it do for you as a person?
it's just, I mean, it's really calming. I just enjoy kind of I guess, repetition of it, especially like you said with spay fishing, the casting, you're always improving on something, you're always noticing something. But it's just really calming. And, like you said, it allows you to just kind of get away from your everyday life. And when you're standing on the river, there's not a concern in the world other than what's in front of you, what water you're fishing, hoping there's fish in the run. And
Yeah.
that's really it. So,
Yeah. So, when you got into fly fishing, did you immediately get into spay, or was that a transition?
no, that was a transition. And I actually, I've always fly fished. That was actually kind of the first couple times I'd fished was fly fishing. Did get into kind of gear fishing, and I still do every once in a while pick up the gear rod and kind of, go back to the dark side, if you will. But
The dark side.
right. But no, I think a spay rod came around. I think I was about 12.
Wow.
There was a buddy who his father was a pretty good spay fisherman, and we were hanging out on the lake one day, and he brought out this spay rod, and just I actually remember really distinctly. It was a beautiful, beautiful combo. It was one of the fish print able reels, and real. I don't remember what the rod was. I think it was a sage, um, but just was like this whole new kind of world that I kind of opened my eyes to, and he kind of just walked us through, like, I think it was a snap tee. Really, really basic stuff, probably only cast for 15 minutes, but instantly I was like, I want one of these, and kind of saved up the pennies for it and ended up picking up my first rod. I want to say it was 13 or 14 by that point, and very quickly really liked it and kind of got out and started using it. And it's a fun transition. Absolutely.
I bet. So at 13, 14 years old, did you have to earn that rod yourself, or did you have, yeah. So at 13, 14 years old, that's pretty ambitious. And for like the youngest people listening to this, talk about what you did to earn that money for it. Cause you'll hear people say, oh, I can't afford that. But if you're 13, 14 years old, maybe somebody in that age is listening and be like, oh, how did he do it?
No, it was saving up. It was like Christmas money, birthday money, stuff like that from family. But on top of that, I actually sold flies very young. I was tying flies. I wouldn't say it all commercially at that point, but I knew some guys, and Trout Unlimited once again was a good place for that. That I knew some guys that fished, and maybe they didn't tie, and so I was tying flies for them and picking up some extra coin that way. But no, the majority of it was that kind of birthday, Christmas money kind of situation, and then just whatever I could do for folks and family members. And
man, so that had to have been, I mean, if you're talking Christmas to, Christmas to birthday, I mean, that's, I'm sure, a few months in between there. So you had to be, that's a lot of discipline, man. It's somebody at that age. I mean, even today in America, our society is such microwave mentality where we wanted it yesterday.
Absolutely.
At that age, I can remember at 13, 14 years old, I was horrible at waiting for something.
Yep.
Like my birthday's in May, and Christmas is in December. And I remember, like, after Christmas, I would always be like, "Hey, Mom, Dad, I want to get this. Can we make it a birthday present?"
Absolutely right.
It'd be like the week after Christmas.
Absolutely. No, I definitely, I had that in me, but it was something about the spay rod that kind of just drew me to it. And it's like, I really want to do this. And I think, starting out, I definitely went bare bones. What I purchased, it was a Echo TR, which is a great rod. Don't get me wrong. An absolutely great rod. And a Echo Ion reel. I think maybe the whole thing was somewhere around that 500, 550, but it definitely did take discipline. It was a couple Christmases, couple birthdays, and
couple
stuff in between. So,
man, that's cool, because now at a young age, you've established that discipline, and you're, what are you, 23, 24? Yeah. So at 23 years old, you have that discipline of delayed gratifying. And I have to imagine at a young age that helped you, if you will, build that discipline muscle, to where as a young adult, that's helped you in the maturity of being able to delay yourself in other aspects of your life there, where most people, like, well, we won't say most, we'll just call stay me, to where I'm still trying to work on that and be like, I want
Mhm.
a little bit of what Sam's got there and that discipline part there.
No, and I'm lucky, growing up too with, like I said, Trout Unlimited, and I had a decent amount of family, not close family, but extended family that fished. And, um, I definitely had a lot of mentors that kind of pushed me that direction and kind of helped me on my way. So I'm really lucky for that too, that I had so many people, in the
Yeah.
industry that could help me out. So,
That's cool. Talk a little bit about the mentors that you had in the fishing industry. Like, what are some of the things they helped you out with?
early on, it was a lot of fly tying, and I've always been, really into fly tying. It was what I actually started with. Um, but like one of the biggest things I think I'd ever been told by a guy at TU was, and this was at the time, it didn't seem that important, if you will, but now looking back, that I'm like, yeah, I can totally understand where he was coming from.
Mm,
He had said, he asked me one month, he'd asked me like, what's the most important tying tool? And I'm thinking, my scissors, my bobbin, all my vise, right? And I gave him every single guess I had the next month and couldn't figure it out. And he said, you know what? It's your thumbnails. You
interesting.
nails when you're tying is very important. And it's one of your most important tools. And looking back on it, he's absolutely right.
Wow.
So it's that kind of stuff, little things. I was lucky enough, that same individual was lucky enough to go fish with him just on the Cedar down in Renton, which isn't by any means a prestigious trout river, but at times it can get very, very finicky. And he would let me go through the water first, and I maybe picked up one fish here, one fish there, but end of the night, I maybe had 5 or 6 fish, and he was 30, 40 fish deep. So getting to walk the river for 6 hours with him and watch how he fished, picked apart water, and what flies he was choosing, what reasons, that kind of stuff was really amazing for me to see.
That's cool. So when you started off tying flies, do you remember what the first fly was you tied?
I do. It was Royal Coachman Bucktail, which is an old school steelhead fly, summer steelhead fly. Really, really similar to the like the Royal Wolf or the Royal Coachman trout dry flies.
Yeah.
Uh, just more in a wet fly style format. And I actually fished those, early on as well, well before the age of 10 out on the coast for cutthroat, which was really cool. And to get the fish, the flies that I was tying and, actually be catching fish on them was very, very cool. So.
That's cool. And then when you were tying flies, I know you said not commercially, but you were tying, a fair amount of flies. What were you primarily tying?
A lot of trout flies, and oddly enough, I mean, it makes sense to think about it, but for the older crowd and Trout Unlimited, it was smaller flies. I had the good eyesight, I had the dexterity to do it, and a lot of these older gentlemen didn't. So sounds weird, but making money off of blind people in an odd sense,
Yeah.
right?
No, it doesn't sound weird at all.
Uh,
The trout flies you were tying, what were they primarily, like copper johns,
a
woolly
lot of
buggers?
the biggest one I did 10 dozen Royal Wolves in
Whoa.
varying sizes and colors. Actually, wanted me to do some in chartreuse, which I guess is a lime wolf, I believe. Um, but 10 dozen of those is a lot of flies. I did some size 20 elk hair caddis for a guy.
Oh,
One was, I think, 3 or 4 dozen of them. Enough to
that's
last
tough.
time. So,
Size 20.
so mhm.
Man, those are some small flies. I grew up on the Poodle Creek River in Vacaville, California. And
Very,
I remember the little size 20 midges that we had on like 6X tippet. And, you're breaking it off, trying to cinch the knot down just right. You got to use your forceps and put them on the hook shank just to get
mhm.
the eye thread. And then you're spinning it up with the forceps just to get your, improved clinch knot in there.
Yeah,
So, yeah, man, those size 20s, man, cold weather and your hands are shaking like
I
this.
was going to say, and it's always cold out when you start fishing like the midge hatches and stuff. It's not the fair weather days. So, no, it's amazing people can do that and find that much enjoyment in it. And I can understand it because it adds a whole nother level of challenge to this, to this fishing. Is not only now are you following this weary trout that could spook, but you're also adding on top of that, you're fighting this fish on such light lines, such small hook, and they're barbless too. I mean, it's a really cool aspect,
Yeah,
and
it's
something I've done enough of, but I'd love to at some point.
Yeah, I remember one day, my buddy Brian, who it's funny, he when I was 12, my dad took me out to this creek, and I was like, man, I can see the bottom. There's no fish in here. You know, when
Mhm.
you're 12 years old, you're like, whatever. But then fast forward when I was about like 25 or 26, I went back to Sacramento and I met my buddy Brian, who now is a guide out in that area. And he taught me how to fish that creek. And this was
Mhm.
before like people were calling it quote unquote Euro nymphs. You know,
Yep.
we were
Mhm.
using three flies with an indicator. And again, people have heard me tell this story before, but we were catching trout out there that that creek was dammed up in the 70s from Lake Berryessa. So they
Oh,
had
cool.
steelhead that would come in and out of there. So they got
Hmm.
trapped in there with these trout. So these trout had steelhead blood in them. So my
Hmm.
buddy Brian was catching these 25, 30-inch trout on like size 20 and 18, you know, patterns. And I was just like, if I hadn't seen pictures, I would have been like, no way, man.
Right.
He
Right.
always had the hero shot with the fish like this right in his face. I was
Hmm.
like, wow, that's crazy. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's those 20s, man. Those are tough there.
Yeah.
What do you primarily tie now? What do you like to tie?
I'm a big steelhead fly guy, and once again, talking spey rods. I like a lot more of the classic flies. I like to
Hmm.
tie Alec Jackson hooks, stuff like that on irons.
Do you
A
have
lot
any
of
do you have any flies around you?
I absolutely do. I'm
Yeah,
actually
show
so
us a couple.
that's like
Oh yeah.
focus. I kind
No,
of
I can
scat
see that. Yeah.
variation. I mean, I got some bigger stuff around too, but that's really what I enjoy tying the most. I'd say is kind of more the classic stuff. But here's like a kind of a foxy dog. Once again,
Yeah.
hooked, but tied on an iron instead of the traditional.
Yeah,
Um,
what's that one? I saw that one in the background. I like that.
mhm. It's a little black and blue with
Oh
some
yeah.
in the butt. Little single station weightless marabou fly.
Yeah.
So
Very
I tie all
sparse.
sorts of stuff. Yeah, sparse's movement, and that I learned that one kind of the hard way, and the amount of flies I've cut apart or thrown away because I've gotten them out to the river, gone to swing them, kind of put them in the water, and I'm like, I put all this marabou on there, all this material, and somehow that fly isn't moving. It just looks like a blob in the water, right? And this is one of my most loved parts about spay fishing too, and incorporating it with the tying is having that fly pattern, taking it out there, looking at it in the water, and it might look great on the bench, but when you actually put it in the water, it can look extremely different. So it's
Yeah.
kind of evolving, and every time I go and fish, there's a different fly idea that pops into my head and something I realize I can improve on in the pattern. So you
Yeah,
know,
I've just been getting into the fly tying part. And my good buddy Andrew Baramy from Dead Drift Society. Check his podcast out sometime if you haven't already. But we'll fly ties together sometime. They're great. They fly in the sky. We'll tie flies from time to time. And he was actually teaching me about like sparseness. So in the beginning, some of the flies that I was tying up was some flies like this right here, like super thick. And after a little while of tying with him, I have some a little bit more sparser stuff here. I got this whole mess on my table, but I mean, like you can kind of see it, a little sparser there.
yeah.
I'm really big into like the rabbit and the grizzly hackle from there. Uh,
Hmm.
like here's again, it's pretty wet, but the sparseness of things from there.
Yep.
But yeah, Andrew's helped me out, and I've done a couple of fly tying lessons with Jonathan Farmer too.
Yeah, he's an amazing player. He can crank some stuff out that
Yeah,
absolutely beautiful.
I figured if you're gonna get some help from somebody, that's a good guy to get help from.
Absolutely. No, and I can appreciate, there's so many tires out there that, like I said, it's so easy to tie for looks, right?
Mhm.
Looks like in your vise or on the table. But every single flight I see him put up, it's like, it's going to fit. It's something that you could absolutely tie, take out to your river and catch a fish on. So I think that's really cool to like appreciate that in someone that, they're putting content out there, things you can actually use.
Yeah, I
So
like what he does. He'll actually do like an hour session with you, and he'll either tie something and you can try to keep up with him, which I was like, I'm not even gonna go there. I'm just gonna watch you, Jonathan, and take
yeah.
some mental notes. And then
Hmm.
next time, if you can watch me and tell me what I'm doing and not doing right, that'll be great. But whatever he ties, uh,
Hmm.
while you guys are, because he does it FaceTime, Zoom,
Uh-huh.
whatever he ties, he sends it to you.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
And
you
then,
can sit there and look at it and kind of pick it apart in your brain. And
yep. And then he'll send it to you in the mail too.
oh,
So
that's so cool.
yeah. And I was like, man, that's cool. And he threw in a couple of some Arctic Fox patches for me too for free because I was talking about wanting to try them out. And
Hmm.
dude, thanks. I appreciate that. He's a
Hmm.
solid guy, man. I like talking to
Yeah,
him. His videos have helped me out a lot too.
absolutely. Yeah, Arctic Fox is a fun one too. I tie a lot with that. It's good stuff. It sheds water really nice. You know, you're going to cast it. It's a really light fly, so
Okay.
and it's really nice too. So
Do you like working with tube flies, or are you like more shank like?
I fish both. I absolutely fish both. The reasons when I'll fish a tube is normally going to be slower water where I'm kind of worried about hanging up, fly on the bottom when I'm fishing into the hang down. So if I'm anticipating a fish is going to be sitting pretty close to the bank, I might be fishing a tube fly. And most of my tubes I fish are, pretty simple marabou tubes,
Yeah.
box tubes, stuff like that. Stuff with a lot of movement for that
Yeah.
slower water. So, tubes in my box have their place there, but more often than not, it's something on a shank or something on a more traditional hook that I'm fishing.
Now, when you use tube flies, again, you know this because I've been into the shop. I'm
Mhm,
very new at this. But when you are using a tube fly,
mhm,
rather than adjusting for the weight of the shank versus the tube,
mhm.
you kind of use your sink tip to manipulate that to get you in the zone. Say
Absolutely.
you want to use a shank still and just lighten up your sink tip.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's kind of where, like with my tubes, normally I'm going to fish a little longer of a sink tip. And it tends to be something, maybe a little lighter, but because it's longer, it's just kind of creep along real slow on the bottom.
Talk
Uh,
about your length. That's good. What's your length of sink tip? Because a lot of
more,
people might be like, "Oh, I know sink tips, but there's these different lengths." So somebody's in the Seattle area, they can come by the shop there, and they can be like, "Oh yeah, Sam, they'll hold me this length of sink tip."
I like 10 feet for smaller rivers, and you don't have to overcomplicate. You can fish 10 feet in, any size of river. But when I start getting into larger rivers with more broad flows, think like the Skagit, kind of like the lower Skykomish, stuff like that, a little bit more broad water. I start lengthening my tips a little bit, 12 and a half feet. I know some guys that really like 15-foot tips. 15 starts to be a little tougher casting with some folks. So
Yep.
12, right, right, absolutely.
Me, one of them.
Myself too. I'm more apt to be screwing up some casts, screwing up some anchor placements if I'm fishing a 15-foot tip. So 12 and a half to me is a good, middle of the road tip to where it's long. It's going to snake, kind of like I talked about, snake across the bottom instead of just swinging across pretty quick. Um, and I think that just kind of helps everything slow down in the water and fish effectively.
Yeah. I don't know if you're active on Instagram much,
Mhm.
but do you know who David is from Left Coast Spay?
I believe so. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so David and I have been becoming good friends. He helped
Hmm.
me out with a lot of my casting,
Hmm.
and again, he's another uh, video guy that will help you with your casting. And
Yeah.
I call that guy the doctor. I kid you not. Like
Yep.
he will literally. I sent him over a video, and you couldn't even see, my right hand really because it was hidden. And he was like,
Uh-huh.
"Oh yeah, I can tell your right hand is extended." And I'm like,
Hmm.
"Dude, how did you even see that?" But like he
Hmm.
can tell by like just hearing things. One
Hmm.
of the things that we'll do, because I'm gonna get together with him this winter to touch up some casting. I just got this bigger head, the Skagit Max 550 on a
Hmm.
7 weight, 13 and a half.
Hmm.
Noticing my timing on that, it's like I'm doing worse now than I did in the beginning
Yep.
because
Yep.
that head is so much, it's not so much heavier because I was throwing a 520 before. So that grainage, what's that, 30, 40, 30 grains more
Mm-hmm.
roughly makes all the difference in the tempo I got to go. And
Mm-hmm.
I can't see it for myself. So even when I video it, there's certain things I can't see. So what
Mm-hmm.
David and I do is I'll put my Bluetooth headphones in, I'll
Yep.
set up my tripod so that
Mm-hmm.
David can talk to me while I'm there at the water, so I don't have to bounce back and forth to the phone and be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, oh, okay, David, what did you see, man? Okay, let me run back down there. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really instrumental to me to have that because I know that during COVID, when I kind of got into fly fishing again,
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
lot of casting instructors were kind of out. I mean, you work
Mm-hmm.
at the shop, you know what the industry was doing, and I feel like just now the industry is starting to kind of come back where people are doing fly tying and they're doing, I'm hoping next year it would be nice if the shops started doing like steelhead classes again. And
Mm-hmm.
I know you guys are big on that kind of stuff there.
Absolutely. Yeah, we run a lot of the classes. And the one I like with the casting instruction, I kind of missed the most pre-COVID was, we'd have a day, I believe it was once a month, it was like a Saturday morning where folks could come down and just try rods and get like kind of like a free casting lesson. There'd be 3 or 4 staff there. And we just kind of be walking around helping people out with their casts and
Where
handing
would
them
you guys do that at? The casting
we
table?
did it. We
You
did
guys
up
don't
at
have water by you.
no Matthews Beach on Lake Washington. So it was actually just a still water,
Okay.
uh, but it got kind of some folks out there, got some people thinking about it. I missed that event, and it was a free one too. So anybody could have shown up. We routinely had 30, 40 people there
Wow.
looking at things to buy and kind of getting a tune up on their casting. So, and you kind of hit the nail on the head there with, the industry's kind of coming back from COVID. All the shops, yeah, they're, starting to roll out classes again, casting instruction. It's, a lot of the supply issues we were having there for a little while are starting to get back under control.
That
So
was rough.
it was very
Eye
rough.
issue.
Mm.
I ordered the Outcast Striker, um and I was talking to I think it's Sarah. Shout out to Sarah from Outcast. Super sweet, super helpful. All those people at Outcast, man, kudos to them. They are very
Okay.
patient.
Yep.
Yeah. Anytime I've had a question, again, I'm a new raft owner and I have the quote unquote newbie question. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
this is kind of slick here. Is that normal?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Paul, that's normal. Oh, you guys know my name now. I don't know that that's a good thing. No,
No,
anytime I call them.
yeah, Outcast is one of the best companies in my opinion, just as far as like their customer contact, and it's easy to get a hold of them, easy to
It
get
is.
warm, taken care of. They're a good company, and they're a great one to work with too, from both a consumer standpoint and a shop standpoint too. So,
Yeah, I remember, what are we in? We're in what, 2023 now? So I think it was yeah, it was 2021 fall. And I was talking, that's when we had the whole shipping container crisis going on out at Puget Sound. And
mm-hmm.
Sarah and I were talking, and I was like, hey, what's the deal with these Outcast Strikers? I
Mm-hmm.
hear that they're kind of on back order. And she's like, yeah. She goes, honestly, she said, we're supposed to be getting some come, maybe the end of fall. Long
Mm-hmm.
story short, she told me, she said, hey, whatever you can do to try to get the money together. She said, I can't guarantee this, but
Mm-hmm.
get the money together and you might be able to get one in the end of fall. So obviously
Mm-hmm.
I got the money together. I had to Uber for it, but I Ubered hard that whole month, man. Like before work, after work, I was
Mm-hmm. Yep.
grinding it. And I
Yep.
was like, all right, cool. So yeah, I had to wait what was it, 9, 10 months to get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just like you said, to your point, like everything was just, you couldn't get, I know some fly shops had, not some, all of them, like had a big issue with getting lines. Um,
Mm-hmm.
lines was a big one, sink tips,
Mm-hmm.
reels was another
Yep.
big one. It's like
Anything.
everything.
For a while there, yeah, it was anything with metal too. That one of the most interesting ones to me was Sage back ordered a lot of their rods, and that was tough for a lot of folks trying to get rods, but they were waiting on just like single components for reel
Yep.
seats, like you said, with the shipping container problems. And No, it was a really weird kind of phase to get through, and I'm kind of glad we're getting to the end of that and everything's starting to kind of turn back up in the industry. So
Yeah, it's good. Like I saw somewhere on somebody's I think it was an Instagram post. I don't want to say who I saw it on because I'm not sure if I saw it from that person, but I guess Vancouver has a spay clade, and
oh, cool.
I think it's Vancouver, BC that's
Hmm.
doing it. And then I know
Hmm.
we have the Spayapalooza one
Hmm.
that Ryan, the owner of your shop, shout out to Ryan, man. That guy's he's I'm so blessed with having great people that have been able to help me in this industry. You know, I mean, anytime I call Ryan, we'll talk for like 10, 15 minutes. And I always try to be respectful of his time. Like,
Hmm.
Ryan, I appreciate your time so much, man. I know you got a business to run. I'm gonna let you
Hmm.
go. He goes, no, 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 buddy. It's okay. I got some time. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Hmm.
okay, let's go. Let's bring it on. And,
Hmm.
you know, you've been super patient with me when I come in with my doobie questions. Sam, what's a sink tip rating of this? And, okay, Paul, come here. Let me. You've never done that, but that's kind of how I
Right.
feel. Like I'm like, okay, you know, what is
There's
this?
so much, looking at it, and I remember like when I got my first spay rod, right? Trying to understand sink tips was just impossible. It
It's a
was
nightmare.
it is. It so is, and it doesn't
T10
help.
this and T9 that. It's all
Hmm.
so just confusing from there, and you don't
Yep.
understand what any of it is that's going
Hmm.
on, and you get
Hmm.
so overwhelmed and confused with
Hmm.
what T10 might be, and then how T10 converts to um uh see, like
Like
I'm
a
even blanking on it.
like sync series, like sync six or like that kind of thing.
Yeah, type 6 and what that's equivalent to. And that's one thing that Dave and I were talking about with my casting was that um I had gone through so many tips that I had gone from like 12-foot sink tips to 15-foot sink tips. And no matter what I was doing, I kept making mistakes. And again, if you don't have a good foundation on what's going on, you don't know where to start and what to do when you have somebody helping you. I equate
Hmm.
it to baseball. I played baseball for like 18 years.
Hmm.
I'm swinging a big, heavy bat and I keep going, man, I just can't hit the ball. Well, it's like, okay,
Hmm.
we got to bring you back down to the basics. Let's put this 30-inch bat in your hand, 30
Hmm.
ounces. That's a good start. And that's what
Hmm.
David was helping me out with. He said, hey, look, I'm never going to tell anybody to take lessons from me until I know that they have something dialed in first. He said, when you can, he said, and don't do this unless you can. He's like,
Hmm.
when you can, go get yourself a 10-foot T11. He said,
Hmm.
that is the most basic to go from there. And that's when I came into your guys' shop, to go throw the OPST commando head there to see
Yep.
what it looked like. And
Yep.
like he was saying, that OPST line commando head for a 13.6 rod, maybe not the most ideal, but on
Hmm.
like I have a little, what is it? It's a I think it's an 11.7
Hmm.
Echo Swing. And he was
Uh-huh.
like, put that on there all day long.
Yep. Yep.
So I'll be coming back by in sometime soon to grab that and see what that feels like on the switch rod. But he said that's primarily what those are designed for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I fish, quite a bit. I've got an 11-foot, 8-inch, 8 weight that
Hmm.
I Ando Groove on, which is the intermediate head. And getting back to that whole kind of slow water tube fly deal, that's one of my favorite lines and rods to fish that on if they're on a near side bank because I don't have to cast as far. And those shorter OPST heads, the commando heads, if you're fishing a little bit longer rod like that, like a switch rod or even a short spay rod, lengthening that tip out to that like 10 plus, 12.5 foot length, it's really fishy with that intermediate line. And
Okay.
that's a really good combination for me the last couple of years is, 12.5 feet of T8 on that intermediate line. And everything just slows down so much. I think in cold water, it can really make a difference, your swing speed and kind of your approach on those fish. So,
Yeah, Scott and I were talking about that too, about just like how temperatures really play in.
mm-hmm.
If I remember correctly, he was saying like 44 degrees is kind of where steelhead will start kind of doing their own thing, but below that they're just kind of big old lump stills of meat just chilling like,
Yep.
whatever, dude. I'm cold. I'm not doing nothing.
And to fly design, that plays a large part in when I'm tying flies is water temperature and water speed too. Because, if I think it's really cold outside and that water temp's down there, in the mid 30s, upper 30s, I'm going to be looking for more slower water. It's going to have enough dissolved oxygen for them. They're not going to be, having to struggle against any current. Like you said, they're just going to be able to chill down there and kind of relax. And in that slower water, something like you're talking about, that marabou, this marabou fly, something really poofy and fluffy like that in that slow water is going to have a lot of movement to it.
Yeah.
And opposed to like fast water, if I fish something like that through that, it might fish, but it laughs.
Yep.
Exactly. So, back on the fly kind of design aspects, that's why a lot of your winter flies are going to be fluffier, a lot more movement in them. They tend to be a lot bigger too, because it takes a larger fly to get those cold, lethargic fish to actually, move for that fly and get them kind of snappy. So
just a bigger profile during the winter time.
And
Yeah.
I have a memorable, actually, it never landed the fish, hook up and lose out on the coast last year.
On the OP?
In higher water, very cold water though. And I was fishing a big 2-station, basically a double version of that marabou fly, trailer trash on a tube, giant fly, and fish just crushed it on the inside seam and took me across current and then just ran for it, hit backing, and she popped off. But a big fly, and that was a nice fish and hot fish too. So they really work and they have their time and place.
Were you on the Olympic Peninsula?
Yep. Nice. I was out on the Bogus Shield.
Okay. Yeah, I heard the Bogus Shield. I've heard both sides of the story. Like I've heard the Bogus Shield is very challenging if you're rowing it because it's very sticky, like lots of sticks, and you got to maneuver through it. And then other people told me, "Nah, the Bogus Shield, it's a piece of cake." And I'm like, I'm gonna have to do some more checking because I don't want to get out there and be like,
It's an interesting one because there's definitely stretches you can row that are not pretty, and I've had, I'm lucky enough to have a couple guide buddies out there that are really good on the sticks and taking me really nasty stuff. But I've rowed down from, I don't have a boat anymore, but I've rowed down from Hatchery to Wilson's.
Okay.
Bogus Shield, and that's a pretty good, depending on the flow, pretty good float, pretty easy, pretty friendly.
How many miles is that?
It's it's not too many. 4.5 or 5.
Yeah.
It's one that you can definitely, there's a good couple swing runs in it. You can take your time and pick the water apart and normally scratch out a few fish. So
nice. That's one thing that I'm learning about now is that what I would do is, when I get on the river is I would fish these, 7-10 mile stretches just because I'm so infatuated with the beauty of the river and like I want to see it all. It's kind of, for me, it's like going to go see friends, right? Like, oh yeah, I get to go back.
Absolutely.
See if those bald eagles are there. Come the summertime, are those deer going to be there? Is that black bear going to be in that area again? So I have a tendency of kind of floating through that. But with that being said, when you're in a raft and you're floating down a river, how will you break a run down? Meaning, will you go to the end of the run, come back up, switch out sink tips, switch out flies, or you just one pass through it and you're done? It depends. Yeah.
There's definitely days, like that day I was just talking about out on the coast with high water. I really felt like if I was going to get a fish, if I was going to get a reaction from a fish, it was going to be on something big. And I felt really confident in that choice. On the polar opposite end of the spectrum, I hooked a nice fish up on the Skagit. I believe it was last year, might have been the season before, that I got tapped my first pass through, fishing a decent sized fly. And I thought, it might be a bull trout. I was kind of last run of the day, had a little bit of time to pick it apart. And I thought, it might just be a big bull sitting at the top of the run. Downsized, got tapped again in the same spot. And, ended up switching. So either the third or the fourth fly. And I had downsized all the way to a small Sculpzilla, conehead Sculpzilla, which is a trout streamer, right? Bull, size 6 hook, and I ended up hooking a 34, 35 inch wild steelhead.
Wow.
switching flies 4 times. So there's definitely times, and that really opened my eyes to that. There's times that even when we're fishing something small that we really think if there's a fish in here, they're going to eat it, we're probably fishing over fish that might want to snap at something else. And
Yeah.
I don't think fly choice is always that critical. I definitely think if you're going down the river and you just want to fish something bright and, larger, you're apt to find a fish that wants to play. But there are days and situations where I feel like those fish can be really picky and kind of critical on your flies. So,
Yeah. And you talk about just like kind of, you got to kind of recalibrate as you're going from there, and you'll hear a lot of people, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves, man, when people go, fish something with confidence.
yep.
And I'm
Yep.
like, hold on though. If How do you have confidence in something if you don't have confidence in something? It's like when your buddies in high school go tell you, just go talk to that girl with confidence. I don't have the confidence to do it because I've never done it.
Totally.
And the thing I've come to kind of realize is that you're going to end up fishing something that is kind of based on color clarity of the water. What's the sky doing? Is it cloudy? Sunny? Is the sun in the fish's eyes? Is it not in their eyes? Are they deep? All these type of things you have to start taking into account from there. You have to go into it with the mindset of, okay, I think this is going to be my best odds. And obviously, once you get tapped on something, like there's a couple flies that I've tied where I'm like, hey, man, I got bumped. I don't know if a tail slapped me, but I got confidence in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and that's the other thing I was going to say. That's where I was going with that. And I learned this from my good buddy, Jordan Young, is he was telling me that he'll always, he changes out flies. And it reminded me of, it helped me to realize, I was like, okay, if you're going to have confidence in something, how do you know it's going to work if you don't change? If you're going on the same thing, just, like a sculpin pattern, and you're fishing that all the time, well, how do you know that nothing else works? And I had to get myself out of that complacency and that laziness of just the same fly over and over again, to where you build confidence in a fly is you have to try 4 or 5 different things out from there until once you start getting what I would call your tool belt. You'll have a handful of flies in your box that are your tools to kind of help you. So for the newest person out there listening, that's one thing I really encourage people to do is have a handful of flies in a box, and to be able to go through and just switch them out from time to time. And that's how you're going to be able to get that confidence in there.
And building on that, for me, I keep a couple really large fly boxes, and I'll take, a couple dozen flies with me onto the river, and I'll take just one little compartment box. And when I get to the water, I'm looking at the water, like you said, looking at the clarity, looking at the skies, looking at temperatures. And I'm going to pick out, maybe 6 or 8 flies out of those bigger boxes that I think are going to come in use. And those are what I'm going to focus on, because I'm really good at taking a lot of flies and getting kind of overwhelmed with, I've got 30 different choices here. When you break it down into just a couple different patterns, maybe a couple colors, maybe a slight variation in size, you're normally able to a little more confidently change patterns when you feel like something's not working, in my opinion.
That's good. Like I have this box here, you're not going to be able to see, but there's probably 15, 20 flies in here.
Yep.
And then so from the last time I went out, I took that out, and what I did was just consolidated it into a smaller box from there with like 4 or 5 different flies there, and try to use that discipline and change those out from there, because it's easy, especially winter steelhead fishing. It's easy to not do that when you're cold and it's windy and your hands are frozen.
Absolutely. You got the gloves on, you're like trying to tie that knot, freezing hands. No, absolutely. And I get that way frequently too, where I stick with a fly and shoot, I've had flies that I've had tied on rods sometimes 2 or 3 trips in a row where, I haven't changed them. I haven't had need to really change them, but it's good to really think about it when you're on the water and take a look at what you're fishing and how you can change it. So
one of the things that David was talking to me about, which I found very interesting, was like, these little, I love these barbell blue and white zonker strips here.
Mhm. Mhm.
Those,
Mhm.
he was telling me that tie up some like blues for the winter time, because a blue, and I'm gonna butcher this, but I forget, I think it was like a shrimp or something that he said that when those bait fish are dying, they start to turn blue. And I was
Interesting.
like,
Okay.
yeah, again, it was, I don't know that it was a shrimp or something, but it was some species.
Mhm. Yeah, I have a lot of confidence in blue as a color too. And I wish for the life of me I can remember who posted on YouTube. There's a video of a guy who has a metal, maybe made of like inch and a half steel pipe metal frame he drops underwater with.
Rosenberg.
Okay, there you go.
It was, I saw that.
He's done marabou on it, and he's done flash on it, and he drops it down with a GoPro attached. So you can see what colors are visible at what point. And blue is one of the last ones that really shows up well underwater. When it gets really dark, you know, just losing light as you go down in that water, blue starts really shining out amongst the others, blue and black in particular, which I think is why black and blue is such a good steelhead fly color. And that's one of my confidence flies, darker water, darker mornings, first light, black and blue is a good idea.
Yeah, I've
So,
always been told. My wife gives me a hard time because I'm all black and purples, man. Like, I was
mhm,
showing her some flies the last time I went out, um, and David had recommended, tie up some orange and whites and some blue.
mhm, mhm.
Um, and I showed my wife. I said, "Hey, pick out some flies for me to use tomorrow." And she's going through my box, and she's like, "You sure do have a lot of black and purple in here?" And I act like I know what I'm talking about. Well, honey, I just want you to know that black and purple are ideal for cloudy conditions of water and cloudy weather out there. And she
Mhm.
looks at me like, whatever. And I'm like, I'm just telling you what I've been told. I don't have any fruit on my tree to show that.
Right. Oh, black and purple is another really good color combo. Same thing with purple. It shows up really well in dark conditions, dark light. So,
Yeah, one of the things that again, David and I were just talking about all this like a couple
mhm,
weeks ago. That's why it's so fresh and relevant to me. Is that he was talking about? He said, think about it when you're wading in the water, and he said you see your boots, through the water, and
mhm,
that's the clarity that you can see, and you can
mhm,
kind of gauge that clarity of water based on
mhm,
what fly. And I go, man, that's a good point.
mhm. Absolutely. And I think this with trout a lot too. And I use this quote quite a bit in the shop, but I think sometimes we give the fish too much credit, of being able to, see all these little details. But at the same time, there's certain times I think we don't give them at all enough credit. And that whole visibility thing to me is one of those times where I think at times we don't give them enough credit for being able to see distances underwater. And kind of what opened my eyes to that was one, watching gear fishermen and doing it myself fish small beads
Good, yeah.
in dirtier water. And somehow, even just a 6 millimeter orange bead, you'll find fish can see it a decent amount at the time. So, and the other instance I can remember that this kind of came into play, a couple coworkers who used to work at the shop, one of them went through this run. They were out fishing, I believe, on the Skagit. One of them went through this run already fishing, I believe it was like a hobo space, something in that size realm,
Hmm.
in decently dirty water. And they didn't hook up. But then my other coworker went through it with a very small, I think it was a size 4 or 6 Winter's Hope,
Wow.
dirty water, and swung a fish behind it. And when I'm out on the river and I've got only, I think maybe they had 24 inches of visibility, that's not what I'm thinking about throwing, is that little size 6 Winter's Hope, but somehow it got it done. And I think that's kind of one of those instances of we give them too much credit sometimes, sometimes we really don't give them enough. So,
Yeah, and that's where like you start hearing about the whole color scheme, like, red's good for clear water and things like that. But I mean, kind of to your point about having, like a little 6 millimeter bead, let's be
mhm,
honest, if the fish wants it bad enough, they're gonna see it and they're gonna take it from there.
mhm, mhm,
Yeah.
ex- yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, you're good. No, I just think it's interesting that, in wintertime, it's a little bit different of a deal, but in summertime, so many folks are still so keen on, fishing a slightly larger pattern, even in dirtier water when I think we really could get by with a lot smaller flies. And with those smaller flies also comes more enjoyable casting. We can start fishing more Scandi heads, more rage heads, things of that nature, and lighter sink tips. And that's a really enjoyable way to fish.
Yeah, I think in comparison, like you'll have something here that, and again, if you're just listening to this with audio, I'm showing Sam, it's some marabou with some predator wrap and some grizzly hackle. It's probably a good 5-6 inch fly there. And then, summertime, you just have, you have a little, come here, you have a little cone head leech pattern that's probably what, a size 6 or maybe 8 from there.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where so many folks nowadays too, and why I like to fish a lot of these more traditional styled flies. So many folks are gravitating toward larger flies. Let me see if I have something here I can pick up. I do. When in reality,
go ahead. In reality,
this is tied on a size 5 heavy iron from Alec Jackson, and that's more than enough to get seen. And that's a pretty light fly that you could throw on a very light sink tip and a very light head that's really enjoyable to fish.
Yeah, that looks like your classic summer fly. I was just thinking I had a box that was just for summer flies. I thought I had it with me, but no, it's out in the shed with the raft. But yeah, some of those, maybe I'll post it on this with one of the pictures there. But yeah, like if I'm sure you guys have boxes that you guys can design for people that are, just go to your local fly shop people and ask them to help you put together a box for summer runs or winter runs or fall runs. And I'm sure you guys do the same thing for people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, it's one of those things that I've definitely folks say like the opposite of like, they feel like when they go into their local fly shop and ask for a selection, they're getting kind of bottom of the bins or getting what people don't really fish. And in reality, when you think about it, if we send you out of our fly shop with flies and you don't catch fish, that's not that good of an experience for you. If we send you out of there with flies that are actually going to work and you manage to stick a fish on them, you're going to be coming back for more. It's a good sales tactic there, but no, trust your local fly shop, trust the guys. They're the ones that are out there fishing. And getting so much knowledge from people who are as well. Even if they're not actually physically out there fishing, there's people talking about it. There's people that are giving them, little inside bits and pieces and facts. So it's good to trust it.
That's true. What would you say for like the newest person coming in? And again, I like to ask everybody this expectation. Like, what is a realistic expectation that you would share with somebody as a beginner and even somebody that's an intermediate from there?
For me, if you put your time in winters, summers, for about a year and swing flies, you should realistically have in today's age at least a chance or two at a fish, at least. And that could mean grabs. That could mean you had that solid grab, maybe you didn't wait for it to turn with the fly, you didn't stick them. But that's pretty, a pretty standard thing to, I shouldn't say expect by any means, but anticipate you might run into a few fish. That being said, there's plenty of people I know of who in their first years have swung 5, 6, 7, 8 fish. So it's kind of how much time you want to put into it, how much practice, how much time casting. And that's a huge one for beginners. If you can't cover the water efficiently, take some time, think about your cast, because that's really what it's going to come down to. You can have the best fly on there. You could have your entire line set up correct, but if you can't cast and you can't get that fly out there, you're not going to hook fish.
And what would you say is like an average distance? Because I'm sure everybody else has the same mindset that I have. Man, I got to be able to chuck it across the river. And I hear people that have told me this, like, hey, man, really, you're just the first 20, 30, maybe 40, maybe 50 feet max from there. What would you say in your experience is kind of that, hey, just practice on this average length from here?
I'd say, and this is totally go ask your guys' local fly shop too, because there's a lot of rivers, and I'd say most rivers out there where, you're completely right, fishing even just 20 feet of running line on top of your head. And that's, maybe a 40, 45 foot cast altogether, which is a pretty easy cast to complete for most folks. Easy amount of line to achieve. That's going to get you fish. And it really is. In most rivers, you're going to be in the fish at that point. And the reason for that is those fish really do travel up edges, soft water where soft water meets fast water. And most of the time, that's going to be kind of the edges of the rivers. And given you may be standing 10 feet from it, but the angle you need to swing it at, you need a little bit more line out. But no, you're right. Absolutely. That I think most people get into the sport thinking they need to throw 100 feet of line, and it's absolutely not necessary. Absolutely. And to that fact is the amount of fish that I have pulled out with just my head out, just even half the head out. I've hooked a couple of fish first thing in the morning, stepping into that first run. And that's the important thing too. I see so many people step up to the water and just peel all this line off and start fishing. A lot of times those fish will be nosed up right at the top of that run, right behind that first rock at the top that's creating a little bit of a current break. And so make sure to swing your stuff short and close before you start working some line out and then stepping down your run.
So do you kind of approach it with just, putting your head out, little roll cast, and then next cast another pull a little further, and then so on and so forth till you're at a comfortable distance?
Yep.
Okay.
And I like to not let out, and this is not an exact science, but I like to not let out any more line each cast than how far I'd be stepping. Right. So if I think the water temperature is really cold, I don't think those fish are going to be moving very far to eat my fly. I might only take 2 steps in between my cast, 2 small steps between my cast. So that would mean, I make my first cast, I'm there, I've swung it. I'm only going to pull off about 3-4 feet of running line before my next cast. And that way, if you can imagine kind of an aerial view of the river, you've covered everything in a grid so that every, given 3 feet, your fly has swam through that water and those fish have had a chance to see it.
Yeah, that's good. I was just closing my eyes, visualizing that aerial view. That's good. And then as far as approach goes, like we've always heard, after your cast, and again, I know it depends on, the situation, but like you cast, you let it swing, you step down, or you cast and then you step down from there. How do you play that in your approach?
Normally I'll be doing I'll step and then I'll cast. But every once in a while, if I just don't feel like my fly is sinking down enough, I feel like my tip might be just a little light. And once again, going back to that laziness factor, I might be getting lazy with it. I don't want to change my tip. It's cold outside. That's when I'll kind of, make my cast, and then I'll step into it and let that fly sink. And it's not much more, but it's another 3 feet that fly can kind of have a little bit more time to sink down in there. But most often it's the cast, swing it out, step, cast again, do it again.
Then do you change your angles and your approaches, and kind of talk about that a little bit?
I don't pay too much attention to angles. I pay more attention to my mend and making sure everything kind of straightens out before it really comes onto tension. I like to not have like that straight 90-degree cross river. I feel like you get a pretty big belly in your sink tip that way. It's hard to make that mend really work for you. So I'm kind of hitting that probably 70-degree mark. So not quarter downstream.
So just to make it simple, if you're on the bank and we call straight across 12 o'clock, are you casting it like at 3 o'clock or 1?
Yeah, 2 or 3 o'clock.
Yeah. I'm more kind of a clock face more than angles and stuff like that.
The clock
how I envision it. Because I know sometimes when I would listen to podcasts and people would start talking about that, I'd be like, 90 degrees, like I know what 90 degrees is, but it would be easier if they just said, hey, 12 o'clock is the bank, and 1 to 2 o'clock.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Absolutely. Yeah, it's probably that 2 to 3 o'clock point where I'm kind of hitting the water and making my bend.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, one of the things I wanted to ask you about on your Facebook, I saw this Team Dead Drift, first competitive fly fishing team. Were you on a fly fishing team?
I wasn't. I had a buddy who was really closely involved with them. And, it's really interesting. You actually shared a story earlier about fishing really shallow water and shocked there was fish in it, right? And my first encounter with Euro nymphing, and I got into it for a couple of years there and kind of figured it out. And then I haven't really trout fished as much the last 3-4 years. So kind of got out of it a little bit. But my first experience to that was I was actually on a family trip in Wisconsin and got a chance to fish with a couple guys who I'd kind of talked with over Facebook. And they were around my same age, and they were actually competitors, youth competitors in fly fishing, which was super cool. Another one of those opportunities of I felt really lucky for is to get to walk these streams with these guys and learn how they're picking it apart. And they were, at the time, I think they were 17 or 18, but super knowledgeable anglers. And we pull up to the stream, and the thing is 4 feet across, and maybe at the deepest parts 2-3 feet of depth.
Wow.
Undercut banks. It was really interesting. Not at all what I'm used to out here with trout fishing, but they were Euro nymphing on cut banks and pulling fish out of it. And I was just amazed at the rate they were catching fish, and then watching the other people out there who were fishing dry flies and watching them catch only 1 or 2 fish. My buddies were 30-40 fish deep. So that was a really interesting experience. But I had kind of considered it, thought about it, but unfortunately the Pacific Northwest is not really suitable for much competitive trout fishing, and there's just not much of it around here. So never got in.
The only place to really go for trout fishing is, the Yakima.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even that, I mean, shoot, if a guy like me in his first year can, hook up with 1 or 2 fish out there, not knowing what I was doing, the Yakima is a great place. I'm actually looking at going over there probably a couple times between the stretch of now and May. But again, if they open up, a certain river that, we know of, I'll definitely, be spending a little bit more time up there. But I would like to go to the Yakima, take my wife out there. She's starting to show a little bit of interest in spay. And I think it'd be kind of cool to get her out trout spaying and get a grab or something.
Absolutely. The other one in Washington that's just, and this is so funny. I feel like the guys in the shop are so done hearing me talk about this, but the Spokane River in Spokane, Washington.
What is it? Which river?
The Spokane River.
Say it again. It broke up again.
No, you're good. The Spokane River.
Oh, okay. The Spokane River. Yeah.
And it's not the most, out in country fly fishing, but it has some really beautiful trout in it. And it's big. It's got big, broad tail outs and really amazing caddis hatches that are, early midsummer. And it's so overlooked because most people either they're going through, they're headed to Montana, or the guys in Spokane, they're only an hour, 2-hour drive from really good fishing in Idaho and Montana. So it's just kind of right under everybody's noses. And I've had some amazing soft tackle fishing out there, which is really cool to do. I was doing it on just a single hand fiberglass, but doing it on a trout spay would be amazing. And I haven't gone over to do it yet. Hopefully this summer I'm going to, but that's one I recommend to anybody because it's very unpressured, has beautiful fish in it. And your average fish is 14, 15, 16 inches. So, nice, beautiful fish.
Yeah, that's a good size for trout there. One thing I was thinking of there was as far as like trips go and everything like that. Do you have any trips that you have planned coming up?
Nothing too concrete, no concrete plans, but I'm thinking about heading down for about a week and a half in June, I believe, fishing Montana. Might make it down. Cool. No real end destination, just kind of hopping spot to spot and see what I get into. So, but other than that, not too much, just some little kind of kicking some ideas around with some friends and getting after some fish. But
nice. So since the rivers are kind of closed up here on the west side, kind of talk to us about run us through a trout setup. What you would recommend
for like a trout spay? You mean? Yeah, absolutely. A couple different options. I'd think about your budget end. You'd look at like Echo would be a great option. Their TRs. Budget friendly. Like I said, that was the rod I started with. It was in more of the salmon steelhead weight realm. But that Echo TR in a 3 or 4 weight, 4 weight for you guys who are going to be throwing a little bit bigger flies, some bit more weight on it. 3 weight if you just want to fish kind of smaller woolly buggers and soft tackle, stuff of that nature. But stepping into a good, quality USA made rod, I think Sage, their G5 trout spay is really amazing, kind of more mid-price point. Feels like a really high-end rod, though. Beautiful components on it, really classic-looking rod. Same deal there. That 3-4 weight, 3 for your smaller flies, 4 for your bigger bugs. And then looking at lines, I should go with reels first. Something full cage. I like to run mono on my trout spays. It just shoots a little further. I get a little bit more distance out of it.
Yep.
Not as nice for stripping, so you have to get used to that.
It does.
And at reels, Sage has their trout spay lineup, which I really like their reels. The numbered drag system on them is super nice because when you hook a fish and you keep your drag nice and light so they can turn with it. And for me, swinging on my steelhead rod, I just know I put that drag on 4.5 and I'm set for the fight. So super easy that way. More budget friendly. The Fluger Medalist, the new one, is actually really cool. It's full cage, classic kind of click paw look, and then the 7/8 size matches up really nice with the trout spay. But as far as lines, looking at something Skagit style, short and heavy if you want to fish sink tips, a little bit bigger bugs, especially on that 4 weight. The 3 weight, I'd be leaning more toward a Scandi style line. I think SA, Scientific Anglers, has a really good one right now. Their Spay Light series. It's really delicate. It's really fun with soft hackles and smaller bugs. So, kind of start there, and you can go anywhere from that. Scott has great rods right now.
They've always had good rods.
Berkheimers are always nice too.
I keep hearing a lot about Berkheimers right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Berkheimers are really interesting. When you're working in the fly shop, I see this so much that when folks start buying Berkheimers, they really fall in love with them. They've got a really deep loading action. They're really classic looking rods. And more often than not, those folks end up coming back for more Berkheimers. They kind of fall in love with them. So they're a really special rod and something, if people have the money for, should consider and should look at.
That's what I've heard. Yeah. And one of the things that you're talking about with reels is like open cage and closed cage. Man, I remember when no discredit to, the fly shop I went to, just because the fly shop you go to, they're human.
Mm-hmm.
They're only as good as you are with your questions. And again, if you don't know the right questions to ask, they're not going to be able to help you out. So I remember when I got into my first setup, I still have it. It was the Reddington Dooley package with the rod and the Lamson Waterworks reel there. And I remember looking at these reels going like, well, shoot, man, they all look the same to me. Like the tracks are different. But I wish somebody would have told me about, the open cage and closed cage, because your running line, even if it's not mono, just the regular running line, you go make that good cast. You're like, yeah, I finally got a good cast. And it's just like, it gets wrapped inside that. And you're like, son of a.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So for anybody listening out there, if you're looking to get into a reel, ask your shop about a closed face cage. Trust me from my frustration. It'll save you, and you won't mess up that good cast that you got unless you wrap it around the rod like I do.
Yeah, that's a tough one to kind of get away from. When you release that, you let that cast go, you're dropping all your loop in your hand.
Oh man.
It's so often it'll find it behind the reel, it'll find it around the butt of the rod. And that's what you kind of have to work with. And it's unfortunately there's no solid fix for it, right? Kind of you can change how you're holding your loops and it might help. But no, the full cage makes a huge difference on your reel. And I wish most companies or more companies would just start making all their reels full cage. It kind of is a weird thing to me because I'm like, you don't save that much weight. The amount of metal used to make that rim is almost nothing. And you're on it. I've had even normal single hand fly lines that have managed to jump that loop. Next thing I know, I'm hooked up on a fish. My line's coming out the back of my reel and back underneath my rod. So something to pay attention to when you're buying reels. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's like you always hear people talk about too, speaking of, getting your line wrapped up and you got a fish, we always hear it, check your knots. And I'm guilty of it, and everybody keeps telling me, Paul, it's only going to be that one time that you catch the fish and you have a knot and it breaks you off. And I'm so like, I believe them and I know that's true. But I'm just like, I'm not getting grabs consistently. And I cross my arms like a little kid. Right. I'm like, whatever, I'm just going to keep doing this till I get a grab. And like, all right, once you get that grab and you got a knot in there from a wind knot, you're going to be like, oh man. But honestly, I'm so like,
Yeah.
so like jacked up about it. Like I'm like, oh, I gotta grab. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
I'm working. It's doing its job. Okay, now
Mm-hmm.
I can pay attention to these knots.
Yeah, the amount of times that I've been swinging a run and I just managed to find, that one nook in the rocks that my intruder sticks in, right? And it takes almost nothing to break that leader, that tippet. I'm like, I really need to get better at it. I'm with you absolutely in checking those knots. So, and I
Yeah.
think we give tippet a little too much credit sometimes as fishermen to stand up to what we put it through. So,
So what pound leader do you usually run on average?
I really fish pretty much the same thing day in, day out. Um, 15 pound maximum ultra green.
Okay.
Uh, Summertime, if I'm fishing smaller flies, I do drop down to 12 sometimes, depending on the rod I'm fishing, depending on the water and the fish I'm around. But normally it's 15 pound ultra green.
You like the ultra green?
And in all honesty, I don't know why I like the ultra green. I know it's really strong. It's pretty stiff. It turns over nice. It's just what I kind of have confidence in, what I know, which I think is a valid thing to talk about too. Is whatever tippet material you like and you want to fish, whether you feel more confident in fluorocarbon, right? Or I know even there's some old school guys who still fish like the Maxima Chameleon, the brown colored stuff.
Mm.
That whatever you feel confident in, just understand it, know its boundaries, know how much pressure you can put on it. It's like watching some of the guys who go down and fish for tarpon in
Yeah,
Florida,
that's
and they're
fun.
20-pound break sections in their leaders, where if they hook, either too big of a fish or they just don't want to fight the fish anymore, they can put 20 pounds of pressure and break it. But a lot of these guys, before they go down there, will take and hook up a weight in their backyard and a pulley
Mm.
and hook their leaders onto it and figure out how much force they can put on it before it breaks.
That's
And that
smart, actually.
is understand, where does that tippet material want to break at? How much pressure can you put on it? Assuming there's no wind knots, assuming your knots are good.
Yeah.
How much pressure can you put on that line against a fish?
Yeah, that's a good tip. I've never thought about that because, the only way that I've ever judged the strength of something is just, wrapping it up and just
Yep.
pulling it from there. But to
Mm-hmm.
take it that extra step further, I'm
Mm-hmm.
visualizing that, just kind of like a little pulley system from there. Like you see them, if you've ever seen like manufacturers test their rods, they put them in
Exactly.
some type of like pulley system and just,
Mm-hmm.
they got the big plexiglass with the safety glasses on and then snap and you see that thing just blow up like a shotgun.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's the same thing. And for me, I haven't actually physically done that. Gone hooked up the pulleys and hooked up 15-pound Maxima to it, but I fished it for long enough. I've broken enough flies off on it, hung up enough times on it that I know how much I can put into it. Which for fighting fish is a really big deal too. Of fight those fish quickly. And I always tell people in shot too, if you know you can't land that fish, break it off.
Yeah, because you're just
It,
gonna fatigue it and it's gonna get that acid buildup. And then by the time you do release it, I learned that the hard way. Not shouldn't say I didn't learn it the hard way, but in the sense of harming a fish, I learned it the hard way because I hooked up with the fish when I was in California. This thing was a toad, man, just a toad. And I remember I had the rod, bent and nice bend in it, and I was like, I'm stuck. Like, I can't reel the fish in because I'm gonna snap him off. He's gonna stay out there. I mean, we were using 5X tippet,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
small creek, and you're just like on these, 18, 20 size, midge patterns or whatever, and you're just like, I'm either gonna stay here and fatigue this fish out, and he's gonna die. And these are all wild native,
Yeah,
trout, and I'm
yeah,
just like, here we go, and I just had to pull it back and break it off. I'm like,
yep.
oh, there's nothing worse than having to do that,
Mm-hmm.
knowing you're gonna break the fish off on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Oh dear God, you kind of gotta like take a step back and
Yep.
give yourself a hug.
And the part of the thing with steelhead for me too that really enforces that's a good thing that we should be doing is so often the fish we hook on a fly, and I shouldn't say so often, a lot of times they're the nice fresh bright ones. Those fish that are the most susceptible to being caught, I should say, in general, are the fish that have already spawned. They're heading back down to the ocean after spawning. And the reason for that is those fish have depleted all this energy. They've gone up, they've traveled up the river, they've spawned, and they're going to try and feed up after that. So they're already aggressive. They're looking for food. And those fish are already tired. They're already stressed. And, hooking one of the fresh, nice, dime bright fish that are just out of the ocean, they've got a lot more gas in the tank. They can take a little bit more. But those downstream fish are really important to protect and important to have that boundary of knowing, if I'm not going to land this, like you said, put the hand on the reel, point the rod at the fish, just either hope it turns back or that's it. And at the end of the day that you did a good thing. You saved that fish potentially, and those hooks rust quickly. They shake the hooks really quickly. But you've done a good thing in that sense. But also, you've gone out there, you fished the water correctly, you found a fish that was willing to eat, you presented your fly in a way that made it eat. So I think that's also something for newer folks to take note of, is pat yourself on the back when you get a fish to eat, even if it's just that grab, even if you never stick the fish. Getting a grab, getting a solid grab where it gets your adrenaline going, it was a fish. That's the moment we live for. Not necessarily what follows that, but it's just that tricking that fish into eating that fly. So pat yourself on the back for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just having those realistic expectations. Everybody gets caught up in these, Hollywood reels, as I call them. You go on Instagram and you see the reels. And again, David and I were talking about this on a group podcast we were doing with Andrew on Dead Drifter Society. And David put it so perfect. And again, I'm going to butcher what he said, but he basically was saying that it's not the fish that we're after. It's the experience that you're going through. And the fish is just an extension of the reward of the time and the skill set that you put into it. So to your point, dude, if I hooked up with something and he gave me a couple head shakes and he's gone, well, yeah, I'm gonna be disappointed, but I count that as a win. Like, hey, I presented the fly right. I was in the right. There's so much that goes into it, right? I mean, if we really break it down, I've heard captains talk about this, in the fishing industry, that they'll look at when they go out to the ocean, they look at the barometer, they look at the wind speed, they look at the air temperature, they look at the phase of the moon, they look at the clouds, they look at what the weather did, a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And I'm just like, does that all really matter? And then you talk to like really good people that know steelhead, like you and David's really good steelhead angler also. And I've talked to Leo Paul Johnson about this a couple times too. Those people that are dialed in, they'll tell you, man. Ask them, hey man, what's your game plan like when you go to the river and you start thinking they're gonna like, oh yeah, I just grab my rod and flies. That's what a newbie like me's thinking. And then no, they break it down. It's like, well, yeah, man, I start looking at this and that and this, and then you're sitting there like, holy crap.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? You think all that matters? And they're like, they look at you kind of sideways respectfully, like, well, you knew? And that's why I just raised my hand and beat him too. I'm like, hi, I'm Paul, I'm the newbie.
Yeah, growing up, my uncle, the one who kind of taught me to fish out on the coast, he was big into that. He looked a lot at weather, a lot at river levels, but something people don't look at a lot nowadays, he looked at tides.
Yes.
And especially when we were fishing, and it makes sense, especially when we're fishing lower rivers, stuff closer to the ocean, those fish push up in high tides. And he'd look for, bright moons. He'd look for that full moon, and he'd look for middle of the night high tide, or early AM hours high tide. So we'd have fresh fish in the system. And it's really interesting, like you said, to start looking at what these people look at that really have stuff dialed in and really understand these fish. And like you were saying, there's so many different variables in this. There's, like you said, water temp, there's weather, and not just that day. We're not just talking how bright, how dark it is, but how's the weather been leading up to that? Has there been big pressure change? Has it just been low pressure? Are the rivers high? Are the rivers low? There's so much that goes into your decisions, and ultimately the potential of the award of hooking a nice fish or landing a nice fish. So there's a lot that goes into it. And like I said, I think people need to be able to pat themselves on the back that even if they aren't aware of all those variables, that they somehow figured it out, in the sense that you found something that fish wanted to eat and you presented it in the way they wanted it.
Yeah. And just to clarify, you were talking about, having big bright moons. And I've always been under the impression that big bright full moons, fish are going to feed during the night and not the day. So daytime's not going to be the best time of fishing. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, there's that, but also this is one of those, right? It's just what people talk about. I don't know if it's true or not. I wish we could literally talk to a fish and find out, but um, I've heard some old timers talk about moonlight and fish moving up rivers as well, that they be a little bit better and that they're more comfortable actually pushing up in the middle of the night. And that's when steelhead do the majority of their moving is nighttime, darkness, right? They have a little bit more cover. And that's also why the fishier days when you're out there fishing are darker. They tend to be a little cloudier. I like the days that are a little bit warmer. That water temp has a little bit of a chance to warm up a little bit, gets the fish in a good mood. So, no, I'm with you though. And that's an interesting point too, that, that moonlight is going to get them to feed at night. It really is. So,
Yeah. Do you target bull trout at all?
I love them. They're fun. They absolutely are. When there's, especially early in the season, like up on the Skagit or the Sauk, when there's not too many steelhead around, if I'm not really feeling like I'm going to find one, a lot of times it's, fish something big and bright first pass through. And if there's a steelhead in there, I'm assuming he's going to snap at it. If not, I'm going to downsize and fish for some bulls. So no, they're very fun. They're very good kind of time, a way to kill time, and they're very fun to fish for. You can fish for them in different ways too, which I like. That I'll swing for them on the two hander, and then I'll turn around and pick up my single hander with a sink tip, and I'll fish back up the run, casting upstream and retrieving downstream. And I've had success doing that where I haven't had fish eat the swung fly, but I'll do that more aggressive upstream, stripping back to you, maybe quartered upstream.
So again, let's use that clock analogy. If you're
Yeah.
looking at 12, are you casting at 10, 9,
9.
10, 9 o'clock?
Interesting.
So like tradition, not traditional, but like you'll see dry fly people, they'll cast upriver. You do the same thing for bull trout.
And my theory behind it, and in my opinion, what's going on with that is as I swing through that run and I'm walking down the run, right? Those fish that would be aggressive that are going to come out and eat that swung fly, or excuse me, the fish that are looking at that fly that are sitting there, that swung fly is coming across kind of slow. It's not moving a whole lot. It's just kind of sweeping, right? Now, if you take and transition, looking at casting, like we said, about 9, 10 o'clock upstream and stripping it back to you, they don't have a lot of time to think about it. And that fly is aggressively jigging down into their face. So it's much reaction bite. They don't have time to think about it. So I think that's why it works, is they don't have as much time to study it. There's also plenty of times where I'll swing one, on the two-hander, and I'll try the single-hander and I won't stick anything else. So
going back to the upstream presentation there, I'm assuming you'll use two-hander and single-hander, right? So when you're using, just like I primarily, we'll talk about both, I guess. So with single hand and the two-hander, are you still using a sink tip, or will you tighten up your sink tip?
Yeah, I'm fishing more of a traditional kind of Western trout streamer line. So it's a 10-foot sink tip, a type 6, and then a weighted fly on that. So I'm, getting it down in their face, and that weighted fly is going to get some good movement going too. And as far as the spay rod and the runs that I'm thinking about, that I do that a lot, it's a lot of T8 and T10 that I'm using to really swing under tension, just get my flies a little deeper and keep them down there.
So you're just lightening up a little bit when you're going upriver. That's kind of. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
There's more of a tendency for that line to sink because it's coming back down to you because it's not under tension.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Yeah, because that speed of it with the lighter line, you don't have to. It's not with the heavier line. It's going to sink down quicker from there. But when it's a little bit slower, it's going to do a little bit better to where you're not going to get hung up. Would you ever use a like a floating line with like a long, say like a 10, 15 foot leader and just throw that upriver?
I don't do that for bull trout much, but that's how I fish coho in a lot of the rivers.
Really?
It's a long, and the idea behind it, you can imagine that floating line is up on top of the water. You got this long leader that's kind of sloped down to your fly, right?
Yeah.
So you strip, your fly comes up and your fly jigs. And the coho really react to that kind of jig presentation. So it's a really effective way and fish like a Clouser minnow or Clouser minnow style fly. Lower rivers, estuaries, tidal water.
So it's just, yeah.
And those fish get pretty snappy around. It's pretty cool to see.
That's cool. What kind of patterns do you like to use for coho?
It's something with some weight to it. Clouser minnows are good. I tie there's one commercially available. I tied a little larger, but it's called a deep six clouser, which is pretty much a Clouser minnow, but tied with marabou. Those in white and pink, white and chartreuse. Chartreuse and like a Kelly green is a good color pattern too. And other than that, there's some smaller, they're really easy to tie. They're just flash flies. Guys in Alaska use them a lot.
Heard of them, yeah.
It's really just a flash tail, a wrapped flash body, a Flashabou wing, and a little hackle collar. Really simple. And it's just a small, they're size 6s, so they're not too big, maybe 1.5 inches, all, full length, with a little bead head, the head of them, and that gets a good kind of jigging action going.
That's funny. I heard, gosh, man, where was it? It was about Ed Ward. Somebody was talking about Ed Ward was they were talking about confidence, and they were saying, yeah, Ed used to just be so confident he would just throw on like a rabbit strip tail and catch fish with it. And I was like, hey man, I mean, like, if you got confidence in it, like he said, you throw it. But I was thinking about that too. It's like, hey man, like when I first started getting back into fly tying, like I used to tie some trout stuff. So like all this stuff is brand new to me. But I was thinking, again, as a new person getting into fly tying, I had no idea. I just went to my local fly shop and I was like, I want to get into fly tying. What do you kind of recommend? And they recommend tying like some hobo spays and stuff like that. But what I would do now, knowing what I know, the little bit I know now, is that I would encourage anybody to go and get the material that's going to move the most. So like get yourself some marabou. I mean, get yourself, some peacock here. This stuff moves super easily. Get some rabbit strip sonker from there. That stuff, get back in there. That stuff, that works great. And with those 3 materials, even Arctic Fox, I haven't used it yet. But what I like about, from what I've seen on the videos, is it looks like a material that gives you a lot of movement, but it's stiff too.
Yes.
So you can use it for a good prop.
It holds, and adding on that, it holds its profile.
That's the word, yes.
But it still has a lot of that movement, that kind of flutter. So,
yeah,
absolutely. And that's, kind of what we were talking about with just tying flies and tying your flies for the water you're fishing too. It's, like I said, faster water, that's a really good material to kind of lean on because it doesn't compress like marabou.
Collapse, yeah.
Exactly, collapse. That's the word. So it won't collapse like that. So, and you're totally on it. I think, and I've told folks this in the shop plenty of times, that you can absolutely build a fly box, tie your own flies, build a fly box for steelhead, winter, summer run steelhead, both of them. And you could tie all those flies with just marabou, schlappen, and rabbit.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of flash, right?
I'm a big flash guy, man. I want to bedazzle the heck out of that thing.
Yep.
I'm big on it. Like, I'm sure I got, a couple of, like, I really like the Predator wrap, kind of stuff, and like the Flashabou and stuff. Anything with some flash in it, is really good. Like my buddy Jordan tied this up here. This is just one of his that got a lot of flash in it. I like that. But yeah, it's funny. I went up to Jordan's. He gave me a swim tank for the flies.
Yep.
And I was going up to fish one of the rivers up there. And this is how cool Jordan is, man. He was like, "Oh, so you're going up to this river?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, here, man, you'll want this fly."
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, cool, thanks, man." He's like, "Yeah, and I use this good for, bull trout here and this, and then this color." By the time I walked out of there, I probably had like 8 or 10 flies. I'm like, "Thanks, brother. Appreciate it."
Exactly. No, and I think flash too is in fly design is a great option for a different type of movement too. And this is something that, a lot of folks don't think about, but ostrich underwater moves differently than marabou. Everything's going to move differently. So if you have a fly that's just marabou, it's moving in one fashion, right? All that marabou's moving the same style, if you will. If you add flash in there, it might be a little stiffer. It's going to move a little differently. Rubber legs, for instance, move a lot differently. And flies like, the graboid leech incorporate so many different elements of movement. And I think that's also what really makes those flies so effective and successful.
Boy, that's a sexy fly, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I saw Jonathan Farmer's version of that's when I first got introduced to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember again, I think I'm a pretty ambitious fly tyer. I saw it and I was like, man, that's amazing. I want to try that.
Yeah.
And you start getting into it and you're like, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And you start getting less confident. And then like on my Instagram, if you go on there, you'll see like I have the first time I ever tried, and it was just in the summertime,
Mm-hmm.
where I tried to do like a dubbing loop. And
Mm-hmm.
it is the biggest hot mess of what was it I was using? It was a blue ice dub.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And like the whole material part for me is super challenging for me to get the handling of it. But I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm posting it. I go,
Yeah.
I want people to see the
Mm-hmm.
I fell on my face, mud on my face type look from there, because I want to give people hope where if they look at
Right.
it, they go, that's a dubbing loop.
Right.
This is what it looks like on YouTube. I can do better than that guy. Let me try this.
Absolutely. Two things on that. One is that, I think fly tying is a lot like spey casting.
Hmm.
It's so easy when you see somebody that's really good at it doing it.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I can absolutely sit down and do that.
They
And
make it look easy.
exactly. Spey casting is the same way. You see a video
Yeah.
of like Klaus Schrimmer, for example, and you're just like, oh, anybody can do that's a piece of cake.
Yeah.
And you go and try it, and you're like, why did I even think that? Right. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's so true. And I teach introduction tying classes, the other point I have on it at the shop. And that's, 4 or 5 guys that haven't tied flies before, or it's been years since they have, and getting them back into it through just a couple classes. And that's one of the biggest things I stress to folks in the classes is just because you don't think that fly looks fishy does not mean the fish are going to think that. And I use this example every class is that we've all had that trout dry fly, right? You're out there, you're on the creek, you're having a great day. That thing is just getting chewed up. You're missing one wing. The tail's cut down by half. The body falls apart. You got random pieces of peacock curl sticking out. And for whatever reason, that fly is still crushing it, right?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, you're good. And so often in tying, folks are so quick to dismiss what they've tied, right? And in reality, you go put that thing in the water, and like adding on what I was talking about earlier, just because it doesn't look fishy in the vise, in the water, it might look amazing. So
Yeah, the thing is I've had discussions with this about those flies before, and someone told me that those flies that look all quote unquote chewed up and beat up, the reason why they work so well is because it's fish haven't seen anything like it.
Yep.
They've seen all the pretty, elegant flies going through the water, and then they're just like, dude, Hank, look at that. What is that? I don't know, man. Let's go crush it. And then they
Right.
go over and crush it, and you're like, oh shoot, okay.
I mean, one of my best days out on Puget Sound this year for coho out in the saltwater. I was fishing a small herring pattern, and was just crushing them. Had a bunch of fish, and by the time I'm looking at this fly, the eyes had rotated. One had fallen off, so one of the eyes is perfectly on top of the hook, and half the body had come out. And I'm like, all right, this thing's getting retired. I'm putting it in the box and pulling out a new one, tied it on, and I couldn't hook a fish. The fish are still boiling around me. I'm still seeing them. They're still eating. And I put back on that one-eyed wonder, right? Instantly back into fish again. And it probably is exactly it. They're like, I haven't seen this before. There's just this bait fish swimming sideways with one eye, right? So there's something to be said for it that ugly flies absolutely catch fish.
Call it the one-eye Willie.
Right, exactly, right. No, I've always thought about it. I absolutely have.
What kind of flies do you like to swing for bull trout?
Ooh, it's hard to beat, in my opinion. It's hard to beat a black and blue hobo spey.
Oh, really?
Oddly enough, I've had really good luck with that. And then my backup, if they're just not feeling that, I'll go to and I call it a whitefish bugger.
Okay.
But it's really just a larger crystal bugger with tan over white for the tail and then a white crystal body, and then tan hackle going through it. So it's basically just a tan and white, big cone-headed bugger.
Interesting.
Looks a lot like a juvenile whitefish, though, which is an absolute forage for those bull trout. And I've had really good luck on that one as well.
How big are those, the fly?
It's about 3.5 inches all said and done.
Really?
Decent sized fly. It's about I think I tie them on 2s and 4s.
Do you ever use sculpin patterns for bull trout?
I do in the summertime. I don't fish them as much in the wintertime. Like I mentioned earlier, Sculpzilla. I fish those quite for them. And I do fish like a Dolly Llama every once in a while in the summertime, but
you can't go wrong with those.
You can't, and that's one of those back to fish not seeing things or seeing things. So many people fish Dolly Llamas, and so I'm just kind of like, and I don't. It's a weird thing to say, but trying to remove myself from that and giving them something a little different to see. So
yeah, I caught a nice. Again, I wasn't targeting them because they were close, but they're just mixed in with the bunch. But I caught dude. It's the biggest fish I've caught on a fly rod by far. It was a king.
Yep.
I was fishing in this little, riffle off to the side that kind of had that dancing speed. It was probably a foot and a half deep, and I was like, I know there's going to be fish in there. I just hope I don't hook up with something that's not in season right now.
Yeah.
I was at the end of the swing, and that classic. I thought I was hung up, and I was like, cool. Well, let me discipline myself. Let me sit and wait so the fish can run, so I don't get premature and start. Oh, I got a fish. So I was patient with it, and I was like, good job. And then I was like, all right, cool. I don't feel anything. Let me pull up a little bit and reel in. I start reeling in, and dude, that was a trip. I mean, this fish just, it wasn't like, it was just like this.
Slow and steady.
And I was like, I thought I tailed it, and at this point I'm like, well, now I want to be careful because I don't want to back flush it through the flow and choke it out with putting the water through its gills in reverse. So I'm trying to be careful, but get it in it quick at the same time. And I was like, okay. And I finally saw its head, and it was hooked in the mouth. So at this point, I'm like, I don't know what I have yet, but let me get him in. So I call up river to my buddy Tim. I'm like, Tim, grab the net. Dude, I got this little tiny net. Because again, until I start catching fish consistently, then I'll go get a big boy net. But this little thing, like, I was like, just try to net him and get his head in there just so we can kind of control it. Dude, next time I come into the shop, I'll have to show you. But I don't like being that guy. Like, the fish was this big, but the fish was at least 30 inches, man. And it was just a tank. And I was like, holy cow. But I caught that on a Sculpzilla, black and white. That's why I'm saying, like, that is a confident fly for me, right?
Absolutely. I even have a buddy who comes into the shop too, and he's been tying them in black and purple.
I'm telling you, man, you can't go wrong with purple.
Not at all. No, I have a really similar story of exact same thing. I was swinging for coho on a river in Western Washington here and tangled into a big king, and that's a really, really interesting fish. And I'm with you. And mine ate. It was really interesting. Mine ate. I made my mend, and I was just lowering my rod tips. The fly was in the water for maybe 6 to 8 seconds. It wasn't very long, and it was the softest, kind of mushiest. It was like you said, just kind of, I'm stuck. Lift up into it, and then it was just this slow, deep run, and it was really cool fish to play.
Yeah, he took me out. He took me in my backing twice.
Yep,
that's the first time I've ever been in my backing ever as an angler. And of course, the first thing you start thinking is you're looking at your reel and you're looking at the fish, and at that point, I had accepted it. I was like, hey man, if this fish breaks me off in my backing, I go, I'm taking that as a victory.
Exactly.
I was like, I'll go back to the fly shop and go buy some more line with pride. Like, I need more line, boys, because I got broke off.
Right.
It's like a battle wound, right? A scar. You're like, that's right. I got this scar from doing MMA, as opposed to I got this scar from getting beat up.
That's awesome, by a big old king.
I like throwing these sculpin patterns here.
Yeah,
my buddy Jordan ties these up. These are one of the ones that he gave me from there. That guy, he's picked up on I always brag about him about it because he's picked up on fly fishing so quickly, only being in
Mhm.
for about like a year. Just like
Mhm.
his quality of his flies that he's tied, and just the elevation that he's had. He started
Yeah.
his own fly guiding business, and
Mhm.
he's ripping it up after a year and a half. But these
It's
roping patterns, I like them.
Yeah, no, it's really cool to see guys that can do that. It just really with them. There's another guy I fished with same way. He got into it a little over a year ago, and you'd look at the photos of his flies and looking at him in person, you're like, you'd swear he'd been tying for 10 years. It's super cool, and somebody can pick it up like that.
Yeah, it's cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's tried to help me tying flies a couple times too.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, wait, what's that loop thing you're doing with sticking stuff in there?
Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah. And then like it takes me a month or two to catch up what he was showing me. And I'm like, hey man, I remember that loop thing you were talking about. And he was like, oh, cool. Like he's super humble and respectful about it. But then
Yeah.
you kind of see him like, dude, yeah, that was like 3 months ago. Good job for catching up. And I even tell him, I'm like, yeah, I'm that slow guy. I'm like Rudy, right? The movie Rudy. I might not be the fastest, the quickest, the strongest guy, but I'm not gonna quit and I'll figure it out eventually.
And it's one of those things that it's a sport that I think everybody can enjoy and in their own way take their own speed at it. There's plenty of guys who are amazing fishermen that really only get out and fish once every 3-4 months. It's a pretty interesting sport that you can really pace it to what you want to do. I think it's cool.
Well, that's cool, man. Well, I want to wrap this up with you here, but before we do that, is there anything you want to plug, shout out, or you
I
know,
think so, man.
anything you want to talk about from the shop or anything you guys got coming up?
Just let me see. What are we doing? We got Jerry Buron, who's a local lake guru. We got him coming in this month. That'll be kind of fun. Other than that, though, just kind of, stay tuned for classes. We're trying to get some other folks in. We got a guy who's going to be running like married wing classes for us this summer, which will be fun for anybody looking to get into that. But other than that,
Explain to people what that is if they don't know what that is.
married wings are super cool. It's where you take, different feathers and you actually, or different strands of feathers. Normally it's turkey or goose, and you lay them together and they kind of stick together. And you can end up with a striped wing where you've used feathers, sections of feathers from multiple birds, but they all fit together to be one piece, which is super interesting and very challenging. I've tried it myself. I've successfully tied a few, but
Nice.
it's always a work in progress to say the least. So
Nice. And if folks want to find you guys, where do they go? Just theavidangler.com.
Avid Angler, yep, avidangler.com. We're open Monday through Saturday, 10 to 6, and then 10 to 5 on Saturday. So you're always welcome to, give us a ring too, and we're always happy to help you guys out. So,
Nice. Well, cool,
mhm.
man. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and then you and I will wrap things up. But hey, guys, I appreciate you guys stopping by. I hope you learned something. Continue to follow the page, like, subscribe, send it out to other people from there. And until next time, I'll see you all later.